Hello everybody and welcome to the ONIE status update. I'm Alex Doyle. I'm the ONIE project lead, and when I'm not working on ONIE, I am a build tools engineer at Cumulus Networks. I always like to start my talks off with a summary so that people know what they're getting into. ONIE stands for the Open Network Install Environment. It is a software program for installing operating systems on bare metal switches. In this talk, I'll be addressing the past, goals I had for this year, some new features that have been introduced, and some project statistics. I'll be looking at the future, involving component upgrades and additional support for secure boot. And then I'll be spending most of my time this talk addressing the present, where we have some upgrade and compatibility problems, but I believe they can be solved with a new open source tool named Do. And above all, I want to thank everybody who's contributed to the project over the last year, keeping it up to date and relevant and finding bugs and adding support for new platforms. It's what keeps ONIE viable and important. So to get into a little bit more detail, ONIE was originally open sourced by Cumulus Networks. It's typically built and installed by the switch vendor. So ONIE has core code, and then the switch vendor will add these particulars for the platform they want to support. And then they have the option of adding support for that to the project as a pull request, which I will then process. As project lead, I also manage quarterly releases, try to generally solve problems, and apart from that, I work on build tools at Cumulus Networks. So let's look at where the project has been. I've been project lead for about a year and a half now. My initial goals were to not break anything. I think that's been moderately successful. To manage pull requests, so releases have been still going out. And then one of the things, being a build tools guy, was to create a convenient and consistent build environment. I wanted something that was easy to deploy everywhere. I wanted to be able to debug builds on a laptop as well as on a multi-core server. And it's really not a problem, but solving it would help me speed up testing on various platforms and seeing how changes impact them across various builds. And I'll be getting into this a little bit more later on. So ONIE's had a couple of functional changes introduced. We've had some bug fixes. There's a new option to show the bootloader type in ONIE sysinfo. We have support for UBIFS file systems, and there are a few platforms coming out with that. We have local cache download for local software and tools versions. If you need to build offline or you have a flaky internet connection, this can help you out. And we have support for a bunch of new platforms. So looking at the year-to-year statistics, in 2019 we had 45 new machine definitions, bringing the total up to 206, 31 contributing individuals from 21 organizations, and a total of 158 new Git commits. This is a bit more than 2018, but 2018 was a little bit slower than 2017, so I'd say it's about average. Still looking good, though. I want to thank all the corporate contributors listed here. And there were a few individual contributors as well that I couldn't associate with any company. So thanks to everybody. Looking at the future, there's a couple of issues that need to be addressed. Secure boot seems to keep coming up, and there's a bug in Grub where it doesn't validate the image. I need to introduce a new version of Grub, but that's been held back by me wanting to be able to test various platforms to make sure I'm not introducing a change that breaks older builds. Build and test infrastructure. I want to update that with a Jenkins instance that'll rebuild all ONIE platforms again so I can have a better idea of the impact of the changes I'm making. And I need to update build tools to work with the latest operating system releases. Currently, ONIE builds in a Debian 9 environment, not 10. And so this brings us to the present, where in trying to rebuild everything, I've realized we have a maintainability problem. And that problem is that build tools evolve. Some platforms don't build under Debian 9, but will under Debian 8 build environments, with the versions of the compilers that are inherent in those releases. I'm not sure if any platform builds with Debian 10. I haven't really gotten around to trying that. And this is just the way things work, right? Updated components have updated dependencies. New versions of software aren't always backwards compatible. New operating system releases have newer build tools, which tend to be more strict. I mean, this is just how it works. This is a surprise to nobody. Now, in an ideal world, I'd rebuild all the code, fix all the bugs, bring everything up to date, and we'd be all set. But given time and resources, getting all 206 plus platforms to build is just really not feasible. I don't have the switches to test them all anyway. And there's the question of, does it warrant trying to rebuild and update a version of ONIE that built on a 5-year-old switch? I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's, the end user's decision, but I want to not restrict them in being able to make those choices. So what would the solution for this look like? Well, there's 3 things that are important. It needs to be upgradable so that new operating system releases and build tools can be used with ONIE to build. We need to support older platforms as well. Things should always build the way they used to. And the solution has to be usable. Developers should want to use it. I can't introduce a solution that's just going to be another problem for people to work around or try and figure out or have to deal with. I want that to be as easily as possible, because solutions that work aren't always usable. My first car was a great example of this. It was great for going from place to place, but if I wanted to roll down the window or turn on the radio or know how much gas I had, it didn't work that great. So what's the solution? And the solution, after looking around, I decided we have to build things in Docker containers. It's well tested, it's widely available, it can be used for free. This is probably not a radical solution to this problem. Now, the question is, does this check all of the boxes? Well, it definitely supports upgrade. New versions of code can be supported. New containers and Docker images can be generated. So if I need to have a Debian 10 build environment, I can do that. I can also support older builds by having a Debian 8 build environment. So that's good. And is it usable? I would have originally thought that I could have just handed out Docker files and everybody could have built images from that. But having tried this, it is awful. It's one thing if you're running a build with a container and you're not actually in it, that's fine. But development requires living in the container, and that gets incredibly irritating. Everything seems easily solvable, but there's always a catch. Users are stuck solving the same problems repeatedly, and it becomes a death by 1,000 cuts of things that are just inconvenient that should be easy to fix, but don't seem to warrant the time to fix them. Again, like my first car, it works, it's not really usable. And I can't encourage people to use something that I wouldn't myself. And coming back to providing a solution, not just another problem, we need to have comfortable container development. It needs to be easy to configure images. The whole thing needs to be easy to use. Ideally, it is very similar to the developer's current environment. And I looked out there and I had no luck finding anything. So, being a build tools guy, I had to write it. Which brings me to Dedicated User Environment, or DUE, which is an open source project for an open source problem. So it's a build environment to create comfortable Debian-based build environments and Docker containers. This came out of work I was already doing at Cumulus Networks, and they graciously let me open source it to help everybody out, which is not surprising because this helps out a program that they had already open sourced. It does build some other projects like free-range routing and Debian packages, but this being an ONIE talk, let's focus on what it can do for ONIE, why it works, and why it's usable. First off, we can easily create ONIE building environments from different Debian operating systems. So Debian 8 or even Ubuntu 18, it's easy enough to create them with this tool, which solves a historical build environment problem. Every platform gets a container where it's always built. Next question, and the obvious one, is what makes this more usable than just handing out Docker files for users to generate their own containers? I felt this might be best handled in a top 10 list. So let's take a look at the problems it actually solves rather than complaining about the problems that are there. First off, it has setup scripts to generate a Docker file for each image. The developer who wrote the software already knows how to configure a build environment for their software. Why should the user be stuck doing it again? This isn't an exercise for the reader. This is software development. Time is money. why should we solve the problem twice? It's already been done. It's not interesting anymore. So this makes it easier for the end user to actually build the software that we're pushing out there. Because we're using the same configurations, this means developers anywhere can use the same configurations to create identical build environments, which is incredibly handy when debugging build issues on a globally distributed project. There's no question of, did the end user really install the right version of something? Did they miss a step? No. Everybody ran the same software configuration. Everybody's got the same environment. Do comes with a launcher app that provides runtime defaults to the container so that it resembles the developer's host system. This was one of the big things that you don't get with just using a Docker file. It's a real user improvement. Things like the user's directory auto mounts. The user has the same user ID in the container, which keeps you from having problems with files created in the container not being owned by the user running the container. And by mounting the user's home directory, their configuration files are accessible. Git config, .emacs, vim configuration, all of this stuff that makes developing a lot easier is available within the new build environment. It's also easy to use. Using the launcher, it wraps a bunch of Docker commands and supplies defaults, which makes things radically easier. How much easier? Well, if I wanted to run the ONIE build environment, I'd type do run image do ONIE build. Or if I was using a Docker file, I'd have to type all of that to get the same effect of creating myself as a user. And actually, even with that, I wouldn't have the create user script within the container. So I'd have to add that too. Trust me, it is so much easier using this tool. Do supports build automation. You can run it to build on a directory without having to log into the container. So if you know your code builds and you don't need to debug it, you can just build it and it's done. It has multi-user support. It'll run on a shared system so many users can run containers based on the same Docker image. They can also be root in their containers, and they can install whatever they want without corrupting the integrity of the build system. So that's that wonderful trade-off of developers get to use the tools they need to be productive, and build engineers get to maintain a consistent environment where they don't have to worry about machines getting mysteriously configured by users who had root. Again, we're trying to sell this to developers to make them want to use it. And having been on both sides of that coin, I think that's possible. Do is written in Bash, so it's really easy to understand. It looks like things that the user is trying to do anyway through the command line. So it's easy to modify. It's easy to understand. It runs pretty much everywhere. It's also been somewhat beta tested. I did the last 2 ONIE quarterly releases with it, and I just might have stealth deployed it at work. I will give everybody a professional tip. If you want somebody to use your software, tell them they shouldn't be using it. Works like a charm. There's no strings attached to using this software. It's open sourced under the MIT license, so it doesn't bring any what one might refer to as imperial entanglements in its use. It's just there to be used. Cumulus retains a few rights to it, but it's not going to legally corrupt any of the software that you're creating. And it's readily available. We've got it hosted to be downloaded from here at GitHub. You should see the Git logs on it for more of the features. Now, I was going to do a live demo here, but circumstances being what they are, I ended up actually recording one, which turned out to be quite a bit longer than the 5 minutes I would have had at the end of this talk, which gets into a little bit more of the details of how do operates and what you can do with it. But even that doesn't really totally scratch the surface. It's a basic user guide to how you could use the thing, but there's way more that you can do with it to make it your own. So links should follow there. Check the comments, and I'll see if I get something added to the video in post, maybe. So at this point in the live broadcast, I will pause and ask for questions. As this has been recorded, I will pause for a second and then move on to the conclusion. So thank you everybody for attending. Here's some helpful links as to where you can find ONIE, how to use it. You can join the mailing list for updates and asking community questions. And then if you're looking at Do, again, there's the GitHub link to download it from. Thanks. Hi, I think I just unmuted myself here. We have a question about the contributor slide. Let me see if we can rewind the video to that. It's sort of limited control here. The slide should be available. If not, I can definitely post that again in the, well, when the video gets posted, I can add a link to it there. Oh, cool. Yes, we can get it added to handouts. So the YouTube videos, I believe the Open Compute videos for the talk will be posted in a bit. And let me get the link to the video. I tweeted it out yesterday on Twitter. Hang on, I'm just browsing to Twitter. There we go. Here's the link for the demo. Oh, it's also in the handouts. Oh, thank you. Okay, so it looks like somebody's getting the audio for the YouTube video. I'm not hearing that on this end. Oh. Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's just an individual user issue there. So I will add a quick update to this. Since I ended up doing the video, I actually did manage to get a Jenkins instance running and have been able to start testing some of the platforms, so I can talk a little bit about that in a bit. Oh, why Bash? Basically because it runs pretty much everywhere. That if you want to, I've run it on ARM systems and on x86 systems, and the code itself is fairly easy to understand. Being Bash, it looks a lot like command line arguments somebody would be using anyway. So I think it gave a broader accessibility to all users. Anybody who was interested in messing around and making their own environment to build things, or had a software project that would be required some configuration, it's easy enough to get in there and edit. Or if it starts acting weird on you and you find a bug, it's easy to take the thing apart and see what's going on. Yeah, so just to take a quick tangent on the Jenkins build, so I've finally gotten a comprehensive analysis of what's building and what's not. I've added that to a spreadsheet in the ONIE source code. You'll see it in the one of the recent commits. It's a JSON file with a list breakdown per platform of what builds and how and what's having issues. So at least now that I've got a baseline, I can start looking at upgrading components and testing things. So I'm hoping to see some progress on that in the near future. That's the goal for the upcoming year. I'll also add that secure boot is probably one of the first things I'm going to work on there. There's a grub bug that needs to be fixed. And I encourage you to take a look at, I think it's Hannah Williams from Dell is doing a talk at 12:30 on secure boot. Worth checking that out as well. I think the handout should be in a suitcase. Let's see if I can find that. Yes, I've got a different perspective here. I'm using the presenter's interface rather than the viewer's. Hi. So there was a question about Do as an open source project. Yes, I mean I would like to see it, eventually be part of, possibly Open Compute, certainly open sourced. It works for ONIE, but it also works for some other things. I'd originally developed it to build Debian containers for different release versions of Cumulus, and then saw it as sort of once I got to a generic sort of all-purposes solution that could be customized by the end user, it seemed to be a lot more useful and maintainable. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to get it out there, primarily to support ONIE and get a standard build environment out there. That solved a number of problems, and also to help myself to be able to build different versions of ONIE, or build ONIE in different build environments. And there was some talk about it going to Open Compute, and I don't know currently where that stands. The networking lead for Open Compute had been looking at that prior to moving on to other things. So I don't quite know where it stands. I'm not opposed to open sourcing it, but it definitely involves some work I was doing on Cumulus's dime. So there's a legal attachment there, and so they have a say in where it goes. That said, they've chosen to open source it, and we'll see where it goes. And I think it benefits everybody if it's out there and usable, and people can find bugs and improve the thing. Let's see. We had a question about the local caching feature. Yes. So I ran into this working in the stay-at-home quarantine for the coronavirus. I've basically got a system there where I was trying to rebuild ONIE. I'd originally run into this about 6 months back, I think, when the Open Compute mirror went offline and I was unable to build ONIE because my builds tend to be clean, downloading the source packages for the kernel, grub, the cross-compiler tools, all of this stuff every time, and my build just stopped dead. So what I had done was added the ability for the fetch script in ONIE to go looking at a cache on a local directory of the host system to be able to just pull packages from there rather than trying to get them from upstream. And then it has evolved this last release to being able to specify in the command line to just look for a particular directory on your host system to pull these libraries from, which I needed because I was going to hit my bandwidth cap constantly rebuilding the world for ONIE from home. Hi. So the question about current standard ONIE coming with the capability to use front panel ports for provisioning. That's a good question. I'd definitely like to see a write-up on any proposals people would have for addressing the problem and defining it. As my understanding at the moment is that using most of the front panels requires getting the ASIC to activate to be able to access those ports rather than just using the management port, at which point it starts looking really more like a switch than just a sort of a standard Linux box with an Ethernet port. And I would think there would be difficulties in accessing the ASICs given the licensing on the SDKs, but it's an area I haven't really delved that deeply into, and I'm sure there are people out there that know way more about this than I do. But I'd love to hear from them. Any sort of discussion on the ONIE, the Open Compute mailing list is totally welcomed. So I guess the short answer is no plan at the moment, but we're certainly willing to look into it. Kind of interesting trying to run a talk without seeing people going for the mic. I assume people are typing, so I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to see if there's any more questions. And we've got, I think, about 5 minutes left. I'll give people a couple of minutes, or about another 20 seconds or so to finish typing, or at least type in a partially typed question, and then I'll know you're working on one. Okay, well, it looks like that's about it. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Thanks for the questions. And again, thanks to everybody for making, contributing to ONIE and making it relevant. Oh, one more thing. Okay. Yeah, the demo was my first pass at actually trying to do a technical demo. So it's, you can tell when a professional YouTuber or somebody that knows what they're doing is doing video, because it doesn't quite look like this, but I think the information in it is still good. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.